ES games are the worst games ever. Notice I said games and not game. There's a good reason for that. So you might remember me talking about ES games rather recently. That's because there's quite the little story surrounding them and what they seem to be doing to bypass the Steam Direct system. Oh yes, we're gonna talk about that because it's hilarious and kind of brilliant, yet utterly ridiculous and stupid at the same time. So if you head over to the Steam page for Egner Studios games, you will see that there is a list of DLC that costs money in addition to the base game being free. So ES Games is essentially a game launcher that you download and then pay for extra DLC to access the other games that this developer has made. The first game they released was a free DLC because when you release a game on Steam, it does have to be a video game somewhat. I know that that's probably really hard to believe considering Steam's quality control, but you do need to not just be like a web browser or a launcher. Although at the same time, Internet Simulator's a thing, and we'll get to that at some point. But you're gonna notice in this DLC list that everything else costs real money to play. Now don't get me wrong, there's DLC minigames released for other games all the time, but there has to be a line drawn between what's a DLC and what's essentially just a different game. So what would be the reason for this developer to release all these games as DLC on Steam rather than as separate entities? Well, what it appears to be is this brilliant scheme they've come up with when they figured out that you don't need to pay the Steam Direct fee to get DLC onto a store page that you already own. So what it seems that ES Games has done here is they've paid their $100 to get on through Steam Direct. If you want to get your game on Steam, you pay $100 and then bang, it's on the storefront. Doesn't matter if it works, doesn't matter if it has exe files, it can be whatever the crap you want apparently. But what they've also discovered is that releasing DLC for your games on Steam is free and allows you to bypass the Steam Direct system if you just release all your extra crappy games as DLC. So instead of spending upwards of $500 to get all these games onto Steam, they've just uploaded them all as separate DLCs so people have to pay money for them and they don't have to pay that $100 to get it onto the storefront. Now for a while there I thought this was hilarious, original, and brilliant, and then I played their games. Oh my god, these freaking games. Look, I'm gonna be frank with all y'all here, some of these blatantly aren't video games from what I can tell. So go to your sock drawer or your local pharmacy or wherever you get your condoms, get your biggest magnum condom that you can, stretch it as wide as you can, and bring it over your head so you get some type of protection from what you're about to see. Because I now have to show you every single game in ES Games. And they're all the worst game ever. Go figure. So the first game in ES Games is the free game that you get when you download the launcher. It's called Line. There's some lines on the screen. 4 lines to be exact. Now you're gonna have to bear with me here because a lot of these games make no sense whatsoever in their control scheme, in their concept, and in anything regarding gameplay. And the menus in UI are different in all of them, so it's extremely hard to figure out what's going on. So I originally kept Line on its default settings and then hit the start button and nothing happened. I sat on a black screen for about 25 seconds, then hit the escape key and was back in the main menu. When I was back in the menu, I realized you could either hit P to add some players in or A to add in some AI. I hit A first and then started the game. This time the lines moved around and tried to avoid each other for a few seconds before the game ended. I essentially turned on a screensaver from the 1990s. And then I added in all players instead, because for some reason you can't do players and AI. I ended up being the blue line, I guess, and I could turn myself in 2 different directions despite the instructions saying I could only turn in 1 direction, but that clearly not being the case. And the weirdest part was that turning right was bound to the right arrow, but turning left was bound to the down arrow for some ungodly reason. Like, it's baffling how you could possibly mess that up. So the next one that I played was a game called Gubby, and this might be the closest thing to a real product and a real video game in the whole pack. And I know that sounds utterly ridiculous by looking at the main menu here. You're gonna notice as well that most of the controls in the game are displayed as gamepad controls, which is really annoying because I had to restart the game 3 times to get it to even register my Xbox controller. There are keyboard controls too, but using them is kind of like sticking a railroad spike up your rectum. So the premise of Gubby is that you have some platforming levels and you need to tilt the camera and the ball to get him across successfully without him falling off the edge. It's a very basic and simple idea. Basic and simple is fine, don't get me wrong, but like this is the most bare bones you could possibly have for even like a web browser game. Not to mention it lacks any polish at all, and using your character is an exercise in absolute futility. And for some reason the main menu system behaves in the exact same way as the levels do. It's very weird. I have a sneaking suspicion this entire menu system was also developed with the game engine, and it isn't like a separate menu or anything. There's also a level editor, but none of the buttons seem to work, and it was very confusing as to what to do because it seems to be programmed by someone from goddamn Mars. Then I played Screen Loopers, which for some reason instead of a start button said let's curve, so let's curve. Okay, cool, we got some power-ups and some different things we can edit here. This could actually be an okay experience. This is the line game again. Yeah, so Screen Loopers is basically the same thing as the line game, except it has better controls because it's bound to the left and right arrow instead of the right and down arrow. So why didn't you fix that in the other game? You can turn on a couple enemies that'll pop up and fire like weird bullets at you and stuff, but that's really all you can do. I got less for this one than I did for Line, a game called Line. Then we moved on to Space Expedition, a game where you fly a spaceship around a bunch of red blood cells. You just kind of fly around and wait for a couple spaceships to show up and blow you up instantly. It's nearly impossible to play because the controls are so floaty and you get wrecked in a couple hits. It's not really much of a space expedition if you only last under a minute. And seriously, what are these red things? What in space looks like that? Those can't be planets, they overlap with each other. Asteroids generally aren't red, so I don't know what they could possibly be. Maybe it's my brain matter slowly leaking from my head and onto the screen. Yeah, let's go with that. And finally, we have a game called Furious Driver. Oh, I saved the best for last. Okay, I hit the analog stick once and I'm not touching it anymore. My car is spinning like a Beyblade. Like, I'm not doing anything right now. Furious Driver is blatantly not a video game at all. There's no instructions, there's no fail state. It feels like someone's first attempt at a Newgrounds Flash game in 2006. What you're seeing on the screen is all you do in this game. You control one of the cars, and I think you're supposed to hit the blue cars, but maybe not. Then every now and then cops will show up and try to ram you off the road, but they can't ram you off the road because no matter what, the game just keeps going, and nothing happens. No, seriously, I just eventually let go of the damn controls and let my car fly off the side of the screen, but the game was still going. Then like 2 minutes later, I brought it back up and everything was fine. And all this was happening with some of the worst looping music I've ever heard. It's seriously like 6 seconds long. I now understand why these games are all released as DLC rather than separate games on Steam. It's because the developer knows that they're too trashy to even bother spending $100 to try to desperately get their money back. Even if they loaded them up with achievements and sent out billions of codes, they'd still get bombarded with negative reviews. So it's easier for them to drop $100 and get 6 really crappy games onto Steam than have to chance spending more money. Now they can sit back and bypass Steam Direct and release all these games for free, adding achievements to try to get people coming back. And that's despite all the achievements unlocking instantly after you open the launcher. So let's not let other developers do this, because I can easily see this becoming a big problem. And the last thing I think people want is for people to abuse the DLC system and make it so you actually have to pay money to release it on Steam. Wouldn't it suck if you had to pay 2 Steam Direct fees if you want to release DLC for your indie game? Yeah, and if that happens, you can blame ES Games. It baffles me that these people do this because they can't be making money off this. Why not just release your games for free? Hell, half of the games that this guy made are already free on itch.io. And even though they're free, I'd still recommend going and getting that Windows 2000 screensaver with all the pipes that move across the screen. I spent way too long in my elementary school library staring at that because it's more entertaining than ES Games.